Welcome to the Practice You podcast. My name is Elena Brower. Let's dive into today's conversation regarding life's myriad transitions and how we refine our responses in our relationships, our wellness, our households, our work, and in our practices. You are invited to learn and love and listen with me. Welcome to Practice You. Welcome back to the podcast. I have with me a dear friend who has been here before. She is a popular yoga educator and advocate, Susanna Barkataki. Welcome back for your second round here on Practice You.
Hi, Elena and everyone. It's so great to be here.
Yeah. The book that you're coming out with now is called Ignite Your Yoga. The subtext, how to live, practice, and teach as an authentic yoga steward. So if you're a yoga teacher, yoga practitioner, if you have an Om on your wrist tattooed like I do, if you have ever benefited from the practices of yoga as they have landed in your modern life, please stick around. This will be a short but very important conversation. It won't be comfortable, but it will be important. Susanna, I want to thank you for this book, first of all. And I want to read from early in the book on page 4. You don't have to have a weekly schedule of vinyasa flow classes to commit to yoga stewardship, although you might. You don't have to call yourself a yoga teacher, although that's possible too. Being a yoga steward means that you are steeped in the practice and that you share it naturally and in an accessible way through the qualities you embody. You preserve the tradition in the way you live it, because you know that yoga has the power to change minds and hearts and transform lives. So you may be stewarding yoga through your work as an accountant, teacher, bus driver, parent, as an engineer at NASA working to launch rockets into space. Remember, yoga isn't something you do. This is the important part. It's something you are. The focus is less on what you do than on how you do it. You show up in all areas of your life in a yogic way. I have my hands folded, bowing to you. Thank you, Susanna. After reading this book, was presented with the opportunity to do an ongoing, regular, day-long retreat for local women in the town where I also live in Nosara part of the time in Costa Rica. These local women, most of them have 2 to 4 jobs. They don't have disposable income to speak of. Most of them have never been to a yoga class unless they've been to this retiro before. And I'm learning how to teach yoga in Spanish. I'm already pretty well versed in teaching meditation in Spanish, but the yoga is coming slowly. And after reading your book, when this opportunity arose, I instantly said yes. I will take one day out of every single visit that I make to that town to offer this to the women. And all I do is really teach yoga and meditation and sort of hold space. I sweep the floor after the art activity. I serve lunch to the women. And briefly, the first one that we did, one of the women who serves our retreat group, when I take a group to a retreat center in that town, in December for the last 15, 20 years, one of the women who serves us food walked into the retreat. Mm-hmm. And we both cried. Mm-hmm. I was suddenly her server, and she was the student enjoying a day off. And it was a total revelation for both of us. And I think it's the encapsulation of this book, sister. I think it's exactly what needs to happen. And yes, we're going to talk about cultural appropriation, and we're going to talk about the finer points of what you present here in terms of Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat's book on the Sadhana Pada, the sutras. But I think this is it. I think living the yoga is about taking the opportunities to serve other people and living your life by, for me, it's by vow, now that I'm in the chaplaincy training and have taken the Buddhist precepts, but it barely matters. It's about living your life as though everything is yoga, as you've said.
Yes. Yeah, it's exactly that. It's service, and it's so helpful, I think, for so many people who, whether you've had a practice or not, it can feel like a commitment, like a striving almost. And so to remember, like, you don't have to necessarily do more. It's allowing it to move through you and to guide everyday actions, conversations, how you handle conflict, how you feel and relish your joy. Very simple, everyday things that I think often get lost in the way that we think of yoga in the West. But it's really a way of being. And at the core of it is exactly what you're sharing, Elena, which is service, right? Being of service and the unique ways that we each can serve. And for some of us, that might be being yoga teachers or sharing yoga. But some of us may never teach an asana or a breath or a meditation, but we still are the most incredible yoga teachers that will walk this earth because of how we care for our communities or our friends or our family.
I know a few of those people who will never teach a yoga class in this life, but who are absolutely yoga teachers and yogis. It's so cool. I had the occasion to teach a glow class yesterday. I record 2 classes for each week, and this one was a teacher's practice. Just thought of it for some reason as you were talking. I basically walked whatever teacher takes this class through the process of offering ourselves to the yoga so fully that what's left is only the practice. We're gone. Gosh, it felt good in my body. I want to jump in on cultural appropriation. I think it's really important. If you're listening to this, dear listener, please stay with us. This is not going to be some sort of tisk, you were doing everything wrong. This has actually really helped me understand what I can do to ensure that I am appreciating, as Susanna points out, and not appropriating. Cultural appropriation happens when a dominant group adopts, benefits from, shares, and even exploits the customs, practices, ideas, social, and spiritual knowledge of another, often subordinate group of people, without considering the source, origins, or people of that culture. When that happens, it exacerbates and highlights systemic, often global inequities. It can often cause irreparable harm across social institutions and political, economic, social, spiritual, and cultural worlds. Okay, so I have been guilty of this, and I've spent most of I would say the last decade with a keen awareness of this and in an attempt to create appropriate appreciation for that which I have spent almost 30 years learning and teaching. And it's a very subtle dance, and it's very important to me. And in reading your book, I am reminded of the Om that is tattooed on my wrist. That is the most important sound of all in your life. And also, weirdly, in mine. In different ways. And you and I are friends. You know my appreciation is real and deep and decades. But it's important for our listener to understand that an Om on the floor of a yoga studio being stepped on is not okay. And I think these little fine points in terms of the power inequity, the harm that is caused, I think these are important points to point out, and also to know that we can rectify and we can work and do our best to make it better.
Yeah. Coming from humanity, right? Like, we're all people. We have roots and history and culture and ancestry. And, as a general whole, I think particularly yoga practitioners and teachers, we want to do good. We're a community that cares about doing right and doing good towards one another. And so often I think cultural appropriation, when it gets brought up, it can just be sort of like this signpost that's like, oh, there's something to look at here. There's something that maybe I don't know, or maybe someone doesn't know. And that there's not an expectation that we need to be perfect or, do everything right. your lived experience is valid, right? It's practicing in a way that really honors, exactly like you said, Elena, like the roots and the history of this rich tradition, and then learns about it enough to know, like, from the culture that yoga comes from, there's certain things that we don't do out of respect, right? So it becomes this relationship of care, not one of guilt or, accusation, but more like an invitation. And so a lot of the time, as folks are learning about this, sometimes we get really like militant about it and like, oh, my studio did this and I think that's appropriation. It's like, okay, well, why did they do it, right? What does it mean to them? And can you engage with them in a way that's, I always think that curiosity and connection are kind of the antidote, and creativity too, right? So asking questions like, I'm still learning, but I heard that the Om symbol is the foundational sound of the universe and is a deep part of a lot of people's practice. Like, what does it mean to you, or why do you have it here in the bathroom, or those kinds of things, So it's more of just a conversation than what's right and what's wrong. I always say, if we could write the rule book on this and just give people a list of do's and don'ts, we would, but it's just not that simple, right? It's like culture and care emerges in relationship. And so it actually, to me, is part of a deepening relationship with yoga, with the people in my life and the wider yoga community, to care about how we take care of this tradition as it has done so much for us, right? And continues to. And through us, it cares for so many. And so how can we keep taking care of it as well?
I think it's one of the most important aspects of relationality in our time. What you've just pointed out is when you find you are not agreeing, and this has worked for me countless occasions in the recent years, to ask another question. Instead of going, this person is so egregiously wrong and I don't want to have anything to do with them, to say to them in your kind of hilarious example, hi, tell me what Om means to you and the piece that's hanging in your bathroom. I'd love to learn more about it, rather than being like, you fucking have my most favorite symbol hanging in your loo.
Right.
And then boom, the wall goes down. There's no further communication. That person loses an opportunity to learn. You lose it, or I lose an opportunity to offer some really good, valuable information for the future for all of us. You say on page 9, and this is a section on cultural appreciation and connection, which is what we're referencing now. So the question remains, you write, is it possible to preserve some but not all of the ancient teachings without committing cultural appropriation? I believe it is. In fact, I believe we, as yoga stewards, have an opportunity to learn and pass along the sacred wisdom of yoga, which has worked for thousands of years to reduce suffering and increase peace, and to abolish the harmful practices that have caused pain and separation. To do that, we must carefully consider the aspects of yoga we want to foster and nurture, and which aspects we don't. We can be mindful of leaving aside patriarchy and oppression while we bring in care for cultural issues, inclusion, diversity. So thank you so much for this. I really appreciate that there are solutions, or at least considerations, and not just a slamming of a door. On page 11, you write, what's next for us is to fold these pieces into our lives. And I circled that, and I appreciate that. Sometimes we write a line and we just throw it out there, and there it is on the page, and it's folded into another paragraph. That is beautiful. Fold these pieces into our lives. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And it's true, as you know, Elena, from having studied for so many years, and maybe folks listening, some of you as well, not all that is traditional is liberatory or is supportive or is even nice or fun or joyful, right? And so it doesn't mean, when we say like caring for the roots of yoga, we don't mean just accept everything without questioning it. I think that's where this gets also like tricky, but also to me really exciting, is it's a lived tradition. Each of us has direct experience of yoga. It didn't come to one teacher. There's no prophet of yoga. There's not one person that we have to go to or go through, or even one text. We all can relate to it in a unique way that we do and live it and embody it, and it can move through us. And that to me is so exciting, is like, how are you going to fold it into your life? How is the next person? And what does that look like? And how can we learn together and from each other? Thank you for that.
I want to return, if we can. I have a few more things that I want to address, but I also want to say that the Sadhana Pada by Panditji Rajmani Tiganayat is my favorite, actually one of my two favorites translations of the sutras. And I'm so happy that you used it. I think it's one of the richest, most applicable, accessible interpretations I've found, and I've seen them all. So I just want to say, let's get back to that if we get a chance. On page 28, we're in obviously the niyamas, into the yamas. We're in the yamas and we're working with aparigraha, the practice and power, as you write, the power of letting go. I think this is important for us, and we could go in many different directions, but this one stands out for me. I put a post-it on this page when I read the book. Aparigraha, page 28, is freedom from constraints, such as attachment, greed, or desire that can get in the way of you living the purposeful life you are meant to live. This practice allows you to let go of anything that prevents you from stepping deeper into your own truth and allowing others to do the same. There are vows in Buddhism that I've taken, the precepts, and that sort of meet and match with this. It's all coming from the same place, obviously, so there's no need to spend time comparing, but it means, as you write, not taking more than you need or coveting what you don't have. It is practicing non-accumulation, and it is letting go of your attachment to what you have or what you covet. And this got me thinking, and I think it's why the yes came so quickly when I was offered the opportunity to advance the work of these free retreats for the women. What is money anyway? I can't take money with me when I die, but I can take these experiences and watching the looks on these women's faces as they take a deep breath into their belly on their back after a yoga practice for the first time. Mm-hmm. I can take that with me to the grave. So I appreciate the emphasis on the yamas, and particularly in this one, the sacred pause that you speak of on page 29, the moment of stillness between desiring something and acting on that desire. And that's a space of freedom, and it's a freedom I haven't known until reading your words. That's the truth of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful. It's something I think about a lot, because our world, particularly in the United States, but in so many places, it's like, what is that Verve song? It's like the bittersweet symphony, right? Like you born, you work to try to make ends meet, and then you die, right? Like what is deeper than that? And what more is there? And I think that's the question that drove the early sannyasis, renunciate, the early yogis, the Buddhist practitioners. They wouldn't have called themselves even by those names, right? They were seekers by whatever name they used, to the outskirts of society, to sit under trees and by streams and at the base of mountains and seek this freedom, this truth, or this knowing that was something greater, than just sensual pleasure or riches or comfort. And what does that look like for seekers today? And many of us who come to yoga, I think we are seekers, and we do have some of those same questions and some of those same curiosities. And what can it look like to be, in a way, it's like a modern, I feel like, spiritual practitioner, right, in today's world. Not necessarily, like, it's wonderful if folks can, take vows and go and practice and even do like month-long retreats or week-long or weekend, but not everyone can do that. And yet I think we can still practice non-attachment and experience the benefits and the power of letting go in our daily lives. And, just to make it a little more concrete, as an example, I met my partner and he was thinking of becoming a monk and I was thinking of becoming a nun. We met in a retreat setting, a monastic setting, although we were lay people and not monastics. And we kind of encouraged each other to continue our spiritual pursuits. And slowly, after a couple of weeks, we realized, there's more going on here than just like love of the Dharma. There's, some kind of chemistry. And so we made a choice to have a worldly relationship, a partnership, right? And later became a marriage, and now we have a child. But always have that be grounded in the spiritual foundations of the yamas and niyamas, of these ethical practices that can support us. And we can bring these practices into our lives. And I always said, we luckily haven't needed it, but if we ever were going through a really hard time, we would go back to that retreat center or some retreat center and just be with the practices, right? When we have big decisions to make, we turn back to these practices to guide, what are we going to do with these resources or with this situation? How does it help each of our spiritual growth or our community's spiritual growth? And so there's ways to live in the world just as much as there are, and I'm curious actually for you, Elena, because your path has really been that of I don't know how you describe it, but from the words I would use would be like maybe an urban mystic or a modern day renunciate in some way at this point. And so I'm curious how that journey has unfolded. You've been so generous with us as to share through the years.
It's funny. The book that I have coming out this fall that we were just talking about is called Hold Nothing. And I'm thinking about the journey of parenting. You're on it. I've been on it for a decade longer than you have. And so much of it is this parigraha practice. Okay, you got to make your own mistakes, brother. You got to have the party and get your jacket stolen out of your own closet to know what it feels like to trust and then to have it be misplaced. You have to make the mistake of putting yourself in danger on a ski slope and spin yourself into a concussion. There are things that I can't prevent, and I have to keep on letting go and letting go and letting go again, so that he can make choices for himself that are rooted in experience and not just in me going, don't do that. So that's something I wanted to mention because that's one of the most, even with my partner too, just to let people have their experience without trying to change it. But for my path, I think to answer your question in brief, I have always felt like an imposter until probably, 5 or 10 years ago when I got sober. That really made a big difference. And I started to see, where I actually was an imposter, where I actually was insinuating my agenda, where I was not paying attention to cues and signs for what people in my care were actually needing. I've made countless mistakes, endless failures, continuous failures, one of my teachers says. But, I think as time goes on, the more I learn, the more I let go, and the more appreciative I have become with the twists and turns and the trials and tribulations. And I feel like I'm now in a place where I can be an elder, a teacher, and a good friend on the spiritual path to my colleagues. And that feels good to me. And, I'm only 55 now, but I feel very much ready to grow older, to be in my 60s and into my 70s and even into my 80s and uphold the vows that I've taken, the traditions, the culture, the importance of this practice, and perhaps most importantly, the peace that it brings to the people with whom I have the great fortune of coming into contact as both a student and as a teacher. So, that's where I stand with all of this. I have maybe 4 more things that I want to talk about before we close. And the first is I want to point out to our listener that when you get Ignite Your Yoga, Susanna's new book, she has a section at the end of each chapter with sadhakas speaking, real yogic stewards who offer their thoughts. And it's so nice to feel in real terms, in real words, what each person's journey has been. I'm looking at Divya Balakrishnan, whose journey has been multifold. I would love to read a bit if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Over decades, yoga has guided me through growing pains, heartache, social justice, and personal liberation. My yoga sadhana began with consistency and intensity as the cornerstones of my practice. It seemed like the more rigorous my practice of asana was, the sooner I would become a master at yoga. Opening myself up to the full expression of yoga was the key to understanding where my study needed to grow. It's so nice to read that, If I said raise your hand, if that was your case, probably at least one listener would be raising their hands right now. She goes on to say, today, my practice centers around a deep-rooted ritual of self-compassion. That's why I flagged this page. I always begin with an honest look at my current state, emotional, physical, mental. This becomes the foundation upon which I use the limbs of yoga like building blocks. On any given day, I may need a few moments of meditation upon waking to set an intention for the rest of the day, a grounding point to return to whenever I begin to feel removed from myself. Raise your hand if you need that. There are multiple points of study, she goes on, throughout the week, wherein I read about mudras or practice pranayama or study philosophical texts. There's always movement, careful, intentional, and compassionate. Over time, this manner of practicing yoga becomes my sadhana. Thank you for including that, Susanna. That is so helpful to me. I don't have to be every single day doing the same thing. It can be malleable and adaptable. I so appreciate this.
I love the sadhakas speak. When I went to write this book, it's my second book, and the first one was more academic and more like a workbook, and there were historical examples. And so here I was going again to refer to some of those same people, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Gandhi and, different people that we've learned from. And then I realized, actually, it's not just them, it's us, right? It's the community, the Sangha that we're creating as Ruby Sales, who's a civil rights activist and theologian, Black theologian in the U.S. She says, in the civil rights movement, it wasn't extraordinary people, special people making these changes. It was everyday people who chose to do extraordinary things. And I wanted to show the practice and the stories of everyday, ordinary people, people like us, and bring that more into the hands of whoever was reading. Oh, okay, so if they can do it, I can do it, right? Or I can see myself mirrored in this way. And some of those sadhakas speak, you might read and feel a deep affinity. And then others, I wanted a big diversity of age as well. And so there's people in their 70s and people in their 20s who've shared their practice. And so there's different mirrors and then, windows into ways people practice and how we can bring it into our lives. I love what Divya shared. It is so helpful.
Yeah, there's just so many facets to this book that I really appreciate. I'm going to be recommending it and buying a bunch of copies and giving them out. Page 67. We go into the final 3 of the 8 limbs of yoga. And I put a big note and circle around the bottom of this page because I think it's important for all of us to be reminded of this, whether we've had, decades of practice under our belts or none, and we're listening to this podcast for the first time. Dharana, which is loosely translated as concentration, focus on a single point. It leads then into meditation, which leads then into samadhi, which is not just an experience or an end game, but also it's a practice. But dharana, you write, is not forcing your mind to focus. It's not a meditation practice per se. It's a practice to train the mind. It's a different brain training exercise for better stamina, and it can be many different exercises. And it's a practice intended to make us better producers and consumers in capitalist society. It is not any of those things. It's not a means to an end, let's say. Dharana is, and this is where you get into what it is, discovering the essential nature of an object. And I would interrupt your words and myself and say, Dharana to me, in my understanding of Zen practice, is intimacy with reality. Mm. And I really loved how you said this. Dharana is a concentration practice to focus the mind. Dharana is complete absorption into an object. Dharana is losing a sense of time, space, place, and separation. So it's interbeing. Mm. And dharana is entering a flow state. And I really appreciated that because I think the reflection questions that follow, which I will not repeat because I want to move on quickly, are very important. If you're listening to us and you want to get the book, trust that if you're a teacher or a practitioner, throughout this book, you have countless prompts for considering with yourself, with others, or in the world. It's like a social and emotional learning, self, other, full context. It's so rich. This book is a curriculum in itself. So that's really important. But I do want to go into the 4 stages of sadhana. Yeah. We're on page 95 now. You start with this quote from the Bhagavad Gita, know your duty and do it without hesitation. And I'd love to sort of mine your brain a little bit for the sake of our listener to consider how this became a part of this book and a part of your understanding of being a yoga steward.
Yes. I think everyone has a different kind of approach or way into the practice. And so within the frameworks of Vedic thought, we've got these different kind of developmental models of what it is to be a spiritual practitioner at different stages. And to some extent, those stages can connect to our lives, right? Like what place we are at in our lives in terms of how old we are. But also, it's a way to concretize and almost offer a map for a lifetime of practice, meeting us where we are, right? As we integrate yoga through those life phases. And sometimes those phases go so quickly, or, we may circle back around, right, to the brahmacharya phase, which is where we're a student, embodying that early, learning, and there the lesson of humility and being open and curious and receptive, and that hopefully lasts our whole lives. And then when we're in our busy, kind of active in the world, the grihasta, the householder stage, right? It's career, family, responsibilities. And I think it's so important for people to know the yogic framework didn't see people who were living their lives as separate from, you could absolutely be a yogi and a yoga practitioner and deep student in your daily life, right? And so how we can practice in that stage. And then in the vanaprastha stage, which is moving into letting go, more back to aparigraha, that time of life where we're moving into retirement perhaps, or at a different stage, eldership, or many of us are now moving into the yelder or young elder stage. I think of that as the vanaprastha stage. It's shifting, right? From doing to being, letting go, practicing gratitude and curiosity for what's next. And then the last of the 4 stages is the sannyasin stage, the renunciate stage. And again, you might enter that when you're 20, or you might enter it when you're 60. It's not just connected to time, but it's a renunciation of attachment to ego, to roles, and rather finding one's identity in spirit or spiritual practices, meditation, mantra, seva, service, right? So knowing that there is a kind of map, and wherever we are in our lives, there are supportive practices and kind of guidelines for what can help us walk that path.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. The last one, Vanaprastha, is the inquiry page that I flagged in 105. And I'll just read a couple of these prompts for our listener, a little gift from us to you. What are you beginning to let go of? And with gentle compassion, how is that letting go going for you? Letting go of my kid. Oh. Sometimes he very generously lets me just put his whole cheek in my hand and stay there for a second. He's got stubble on his face. And it's totally the face that I saw when he was 3. And I couldn't figure out why I was seeing a kid with dark hair and a man, but I saw his face. What wisdom is arising and becoming born within you in this phase? So cool. So cool, especially if you're kind of resisting getting older. On 109, Sadhaka Speak, Dr. Gail Parker, whoa, really focusing on her inner guidance and her voice. She's not running a perfect game, she says. No one is. But the daily practice of stillness allows me to check in with myself so that I know the difference between intuition and emotion. They are not the same. Boy, you and I could just write a whole book on that.
Right.
Intuition or emotion. All right. I'm going to go now to page 116. Sort of the last point of what might potentially feel uncomfortable, dear listener. It feels uncomfortable for me, if I may say so. At the top, the practice of inner decolonization is not a one-and-done exercise. It's something we must revisit repeatedly. Here are some tools, you write, that I found helpful on my own path. Okay, and we're going to go through 8 tools. I think it's worth our time. I know we're going a little long, but that's okay. The first is acknowledge the systemic nature of the blocks that are arising. Remind yourself that there may be social conditioning, achievement-based imperatives, yes, oppression and inequity at play that feed a sense of inner doubt. Number 2, reframe your thoughts. Beginning something new is rarely easy. It's okay, knowing that you'll get better with practice. Don't compare yourself to others or some future state of perfection. Talk back to your inner critic. Remind yourself of all the reasons that you can be of service. We literally have to decolonize our minds and bodies to remember this service that we're offering is important, worthwhile, needed, and we can do it in a way that is appreciative and not appropriating. Talk back to your inner critic. Remind yourself of all the reasons you can be of service, all the ways you are interesting and fun. Number 3, and do you have the book in front of you, Susanna?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm going to talk about number 3, and then I would love for you to go through 4 through 8. Accept defeat. True failure, or the feeling of it, often has unique and often important teachings within it. In fact, you write, the times I've failed have been my greatest teachers, but maybe not right away. The gift is often something I need to reflect upon and come to understand on my own. Often the growth we want is on the other side of acceptance. I've had to accept a lot of ridiculous missteps of mine. Do you mind taking us through support, reach out, consider, practice, and reconnect?
Yes. Number 4, support the mind using mantra such as Om or inner affirmations, replacing negative self-talk with positive thoughts. I am enough just as I am. I am worthy. I am calm. 5, reach out in advance. Find a community that shares your values in this practice. It can be helpful to have circles, colleagues, friends, or sangha to connect with, people who can support and lift you up, and you in turn can do the same. And then just for context, this section is sort of about encouraging folks to practice, to live their yoga, right, and teach. And so sometimes we come up with what you mentioned earlier, Elena, that sense of being an imposter or feeling not good enough or not worthy. And so that's very normal. So I'm trying to normalize it and then offer some tools of inner decolonization that can help. So 6 is consider that the reason you're so anxious or concerned could be because you care so much. Tune into the feeling and the value below the concern and let those feelings of love nourish and connect you. Practice aparigraha, loosen the grip, let it go. I find it helpful to ask myself, what is the worst case scenario? Can I deal with that? Or better still, how would I deal with that? 7, practice self-love, self-care, and self-compassion. Know that this work can help to heal the past traumas of your ancestors, all those generations who came before you, and stop that intergenerational trauma from being passed on to future generations. It is powerful. You are growing. You are learning. You got this. I remind myself, trust that I am the message. Get out of the way and let the gift come through you. Remember, you are a vehicle for the teachings. And 8, reconnect to your practice and offer it up as service for the liberation of all. Don't neglect time on your mat or your cushion, which gives you the opportunity to reflect, recharge your batteries, and recommit to your sadhana. Interrupt oppression within and without.
Thank you so much for that. And that, as you said, is a really important one for, if you're listening, it doesn't matter where you come from, what you're doing, who you are. Most likely those practices will be useful for you in your life as you proceed, as a parent, as a professional, whatever the case. Page 118, you offer us a list of ways to begin to decolonize the yoga and other practices from South Asia. We're not going to go through them, but they are very, very important. Again, that's on page 119 through 121. And on 121, you offer ways to offer reparations. And these are some of the things that I'm working through now myself, almost like the 12-step program for my yoga practice. But things like citing correct cultural references, thoughtful positioning of the knowledge that comes from the land and the heart of the cultures and practices in where you're teaching, deep inquiry, embodiment, repair. These reparations on page 121 can look many ways, you say, and here are some suggestions with which we'll close. Spend your money on those from whom this practice came. Hire diverse South Asian and Desi teachers. This is obviously for studios, and hire and consult with BIPOC, race equity, and yoga teachers. Really good idea. Lots of mistakes are being made on many levels. Learn and practice the full expanse of what yoga can be, which is this conversation, all the things that we've mentioned. In your book buying, in any sort of aggression that you witness, discrimination that you witness, in your charitable donations. Consider India. Consider the preservation of yoga traditions within that culture. It goes on. You're going to meet inner resistance. And this, Susanna, is my last question for you. We're on page 125. There are so many other things that I flagged, but I'm going to close here. No matter how many times you cross your symbolic threshold, you write, moments of doubt may crop up. That within the call to adventure and exploration, there's also the knock and pull of resistance. And I thought it might be interesting to talk to you about where you've encountered resistance, how you've kind of stood up to it, melted it, visited with it, transformed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I meet inner resistance all the time and outer resistance as well. But recently I was in this practice of aparigraha and letting go. And for about a decade, I've run teacher trainings, right? They started out of my backyard because my friends asked me, they could tell through all the study, they're like, you've really changed. Can you share with us what the wisdom is that you're living? And it took a while, but I agreed, right? And then that grew and became a school and an institute. And then with the pandemic, turned into online learning. And last year I was like, well, what if I just don't do this? What if I let this go? Am I putting myself in a box by staying in this role of being a teacher of teachers, right? Of running these teacher training kind of experiences, and what more is there for me to explore? And I really sat with that and, even told people like, okay, this is the last one, I'm letting go. And it was over the winter break, this last winter break. I was like, I was looking for other things that I could do, and none of them really seemed that enjoyable. I was like, I don't really want to consult to organizations, or, it would be great. Like, I'll take it if it comes. But I'm a teacher at heart. I love to teach, and I love to support people in the harmony, the harmony questions rather than the breakdown. I mean, the breakdown too, of course, that's part of it, but like, how can we move towards evolution, and to do that over a length of time? And so I was like, well, what is my attachment to detaching, right? Like, that was really deep. It's like, well, what is this about for me? Why do I need to say, oh, I'm no longer doing this? And what if it's actually the very thing that I'm doing that is what I want to continue right now? And the exploration, the next steps. So my next step that I think emerged from that is, well, I really want to write fiction. I want to write creatively, and like create worlds and bring stories off the page, spiritual stories, but also ones grounded in reality and almost like a dystopian spiritual fiction. We'll see where it goes, right? And that those two things are not mutually exclusive. Following my dreams and doing what I'm doing now and what I love, those can both happen at the same time. And it's not always easy. I'm in a current moment of feeling kind of nuts. I'm getting better from an illness, and there's a lot going on in the world. So I'm not feeling as inspired into that next path of like creative writing. But I know that that time will come, and that saying yes again to like who I am, what I've been called into this world to do, which is teach and share as a teacher. It's okay to doubt it. It's okay to question it. But right now I don't need to fight that. I can just be in that role, and let's let it emerge and see what it turns into. And there will be space for the next things to come. And so that's my current, exploration of working with inner resistance, is really honestly a lot of just feeling the feelings, accepting, and then practicing trust of myself, trust of this practice, and trust of the path.
That intimacy with reality as it is, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The gratitude that I have for your work knows no bounds, dear Susanna. I have the advance review copy here. I'm going to be sending it along, donating it to a friend of mine who's just getting her training as a yoga teacher. I'm going to be translating some of the sections and prompts into Spanish for my next Retiro de Mujeres. And I'm just so thankful. I have my hands together, bowing to you for everything that you do and continue to commit to.
Thank you so much, Elena, and so grateful for you. And I hope that everyone listening feels, that connection to yoga and that way that you can share in, your life and your expression of it in only the way that you can, and in the way that our world so deeply needs, and that we've watered those seeds and maybe lit a little bit of inspiration for you.
Thank you so much.